Okay, welcome you all to our last panel discussion on the case for reparations. We're so elated that you all are here. We invite you to stay on for our closing roundtable discussion, where we hope to bring many of the panelists. I'm not sure we can get all the panelists on stage. I think there's 17 people total or something like that. So maybe we'll go out in the atrium, but we'll figure that out and announce it to you all for our closing roundtable discussion. So for this final panel on the case for reparations, there are some really key questions that have come up that I would love to sort of use and as an opening salvo as we hear these wonderful papers. And, you know, one question is a question that was articulated by Balraj Gill in her presentation, where she said, in the sort of American academic historical project, when did the excavation of land and when the excavation of race get disarticulated, right? So the disarticulation of the scholarship, and also the certainly sort of larger popular cultural understandings of race and land. And to really sort of, one of the goals, obviously, of the symposium is to put those two as mutually constitutive. Another key question that has come up from the panelists has been the question of burden. And as we think about this panel, the case for reparations, you know, Professor Lee talked about how burden is understood as a negative effect, that in order for the future potential of the nation to be operationalized, that negative feeling has to be stopped, right? So the nation wants to throw off the burden so it can now then be objective, and then sort of be this sort of arbiter of tolerance. And so I guess the question here is this negative weight of the settler state that is constantly seeking to absolve itself of. What is the work of burden here? And I think we should really sort of think seriously about the desire to remove burden, right? The desire to remove burden and to, again, sort of conjure innocence as the original state. What does that mean for reparations? And what does that mean about certainly sort of how one sort of thinks through suffering, guilt, absolution, et cetera, et cetera. Another, and sort of my third and final point is that I was actually recently reading actually to The Critique of Black Reason by Achille Mbembe. And in that book, he actually makes the argument what he calls the becoming black of the world. And I was actually really struck by that argument. In a sense, he's saying that historically blackness has been sort of a sort of category of human experiences that has not only signified dispossession, but a sort of deracination of possibility in terms of time and in terms of its future, right? Enslaved peoples were both capital and as labor, who were sort of ascribed that kind of experience. And at the same time, blackness is also understood in many ways as also joy, et cetera, et cetera. So he problematizes that a little bit. But in theorizing the present precarity of the world, he talks about what he says, the becoming black of the world. Right? That whereas blackness was something that, of course, mainly and originally ascribed onto black folks, this condition is, in a sense, now fungible. Many folks claim it, and many folks use it to explain their precarity. So in that context, how do we think about the case for reparations? So I think that's an instructive one. Okay, so I want to introduce our wonderful panelists, and by way of reading some of their bios. Ana Lucia Araujo is a full professor in the Department of History at Howard University in Washington, D.C. Her research explores the history, memory, and heritage of slavery. She's authored and edited over 10 books on these themes, including Public Memory of Slavery, Victims and Perpetrators in the South Atlantic, Shadows of the Slave Past, Memory, Heritage, and Slavery, and Brazil Through French Eyes, a 19th century artist in the tropics. Since last November, she's a member of the International Scientific Committee on the UNESCO Slave Route Project. Her latest single-authored book, Reparations for Slavery and the Slave Trade, A Transnational and Comparative History, was published by Bloomsbury in 2017. Therese Burden-Stelly is an assistant professor and Mellon Faculty Fellow of Africana Studies and Political Science at Carleton College. She's a scholar of radical Black political theory, political economy, and intellectual history. She's currently working on 3 book projects: W.E.B. Du Bois, A Life in American History, co-authored with Gerald Horne, Epistemologies of Blackness, and The Radical Horizon of Black Betrayal, Anti-Radicalism, Anti-Blackness, and U.S. State Violence. She's a regular contributor to Black Perspectives, the blog of the African American Intellectual Historical Society, an external reviewer for Critical Philosophy of Race, and American Studies Quarterly. Her forthcoming and published work appears in journals including Souls, a critical journal of politics, culture and society, the CLR James Journal, the Du Bois Review, Social Science Research on Race, and Socialism and Democracy. Becca Gerken is a Horace T. Morse Distinguished Associate Professor of English and Native American and Indigenous Studies at the University of Minnesota Morris, and the president of the Association for the Study of American Indian Literatures. Her research focuses on Indigenous identity and representation, federal Indian policy, Indigenous masculinities, and pedagogy. She is co-editor of Gambling on Authenticity, Gaming the Noble Savage and the Not-So-New Indian, and her articles have appeared in American Indian Quarterly, Transmotion, and African American Review. Kevin Whalen is an assistant professor of Native American and Indigenous Studies and History at the University of Minnesota Morris. His research and writing focus on Indigenous education and labor. He's the author of Native Students at Work, American Indian Labor and Sherman Institute's Outing Program, 1900 to 1940, and his articles have appeared in Western Historical Quarterly, Pacific Historical Review, and American Indian Culture and Research Journal. Nina Presley was appointed as Aurora St. Anthony Neighborhood Development Corporation's Executive Director in 2002. She has a BA from Metropolitan State University. She came to ASANDC after working 16 years at Health Partners, in which she was a Utilization Management Department Utilization Authorization Examiner, leading diversity awareness training for current and new employees, initiative to better delivery of healthcare and services, and was awarded 2 Employee Leadership Awards. A true community builder, Nita has galvanized the community to push for alternative redevelopment visions, from one which could leave community members saddled with burdens to one that builds wealth, improves the quality of life, and lifts people out of poverty. She especially has provided leadership and organizing support for the African American community, previously impacted by the construction of I-94 through the heart of neighborhoods, and to ensure benefits for those already injured community in light of the light rail construction. She was awarded the Twin Cities LISC Community Development Leadership Award, the Facing the Race Ambassador Award, the Metropolitan State University's 40th Alumni Who's Made a Difference Award, the 2013 KMOJ FM 89.9 in Twin Cities Stepper Celebrating the Sisters Community Award. Nita Priestley is currently Commissioner of the Human Rights Economic Equal Opportunity for the City of St. Paul. She was elected to serve on the St. Paul Mayor's Central Corridor Task Force that created the strategy for the Central Corridor, the development strategy for the Central Corridor. She continues to both serve many nonprofit organizational boards and volunteer in her community and in her church. Michael Ralph holds a BA in Africana Studies from Morris Brown College and a PhD in Anthropology from the University of Chicago. He teaches in the Department of Social and Cultural Analysis in the School of Medicine at NYU. His research combines history and politics with medical anthropology through an explicit focus on debt, slavery, insurance, forensics, and incarceration. Michael has previously served as the founding director of the Race and Public Space Working Group, sponsored by the Institute for Public Knowledge at NYU. In that capacity, he created actuarial parameters for reparations for the transatlantic slave trade and colonialism and other atrocities and incidences of state violence. Michael's first book, Forensics of Capital, argues that the social profile of an individual or country is a credit profile as well as a forensic profile. His 2 more recent book projects center on slavery, insurance, and incarceration. Life explores how the U.S. insurance industry affixes monetary value to human life. Breaking with the consensus among historians that slave insurance is distinct from life insurance because slaves were legally classified as property, Michael demonstrates that life insurance was built from the legal rationale and commercial logic of marine insurance and later slave insurance. If Michael's research on insurance reveals that even people who were enslaved could inhabit social standing approximating that of dehumanized free workers, his other current book project explores how free people can be trapped in a predicament that approximates slavery. Before 13th revises the scholarly consensus on the history of convict leasing, demonstrating that if it did not begin with the 13th Amendment, but several decades prior. At present, Michael's also engaged in ethnographic work in Eritrea concerning commendations the state prepares for the families of veterans who died during more than 3 decades of warfare with Ethiopia to secure and defend independence. He is editor-in-chief of Transforming Anthropology, the flagship journal of the Association for Black Anthropologists. Michael wrote and directed the forthcoming animated short musical Fishing, which explores the ingenuity of people who are incarcerated and built the multimedia archive, Treasury of Weary Souls, the world's most comprehensive ledger of insured slaves. So welcome to all the panelists, and we will begin with Professor